All righty, so we are ready to go. Thank you so much, Andre, for having the time to take out of your schedule to join me here today. It was great to have you here to talk a little about your career, radio, and also just a little bit about rock and roll music in general. So first off, I just was interested to know about your upbringing in radio and what got you interested in it as well.
Well, mine's kind of a unique story, Luke. My first exposure to a radio station was at age 9 because I had an older brother, still do, who was a disc jockey for many, many years, and would travel all over the countries in Kansas City and Denver and Florida. But then he got a job in Philadelphia on the radio, and here I am, like a 6, 7-year-old kid, and I'm tuning in the radio, and I'm hearing my brother on the air playing all these like songs, So it really stuck with me for a couple of years and got me really fired up about hearing him on the air. And I loved music to begin with. And the combination of the two just sounded so exciting. So one day, my brother was working at a radio station here called WIBG in Philadelphia, 1970, and he was working on a Saturday. And he said, "Hey, you want to come by and hang with me for the day?" I was like, "What?" Years old, right? Summertime. I was between 4th and 5th grade down in Jersey. So we go to the radio station, and I'm telling you, man, and I've been telling this story for years. I was in that building 30 seconds. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I said, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen." The fact that this record, because it was all records back then, was being played. I can look at this record and see this being played out over the radio. And you can go on here and talk about it. And you can go out and do appearances and then go to concerts. I mean, it was like the dream come true. So my brother was very, very supportive. And my father, who's an engineer at KYW television back in the day, for many, many years, had electronics know-how. Between him and my brother, they saw my passion for this, and they literally built me a pirate radio station in my bedroom when I was 10 years old. Literally a working pirate. It went like 6 blocks in the neighborhood.
Wow.
And what that was my training ground. That was my training ground for a number of years. I had 2 turntables, I had a microphone, mixer, cue and air, and all kinds. It was a real working station with rudimentary equipment, but it was made with love, homemade by the hands of my brother. And for years, I just perfected my craft and broadcast in the neighborhood, had friends come on the air and do shifts and all that stuff. And then one day when I was 16, a guy who worked with my dad was working in Trenton at WPST, if you're familiar with that station. Great station up there. And he said, "Hey, they're looking for an all-night DJ. You think your kid would want to give it a try?" I'm thinking, I'm 16 years old. They're not going to want to hire me. That's ridiculous. So I sent him one of the tapes from my bootleg pirate station to the boss, and he hired me. Hired me to do the overnight show at 16 years old, and that was 45 years ago this July.
Wow,
So I'm really doing my life's dream, Luke. This is all I've ever wanted to do in my life, is be on the radio and play music and have a great time and do charitable work and go to concerts and all that stuff. And I get to do it every single day, so I'm so blessed.
That is wonderful. That is so cool just to have that, ability and, so young to have that, experience and exposure to radio and just knowing, in that moment that you knew that was what you wanted to do. That's so cool.
Yep.
And, just going off of that too. So you, obviously at MGK and, the other stations you worked with some other great Philadelphia legendary radio personalities and DJs. And I'm just wondering what kind of impacted those DJs, both presently who you work with and also in the past. What kind of impact did they have on your career?
I think everybody did. But my brother, first and foremost, of course, was my biggest mentor. I still think he's the greatest DJ in the history of radio. There's no one better than Bill Gardner. But I learned very early on that the more you listen, the more you learn. And so I would just go to radio. The first radio job at Princeton, New Jersey, at PST. There was also an AM station there, and there are a lot of old timers there that had been in Philly radio and Trenton radio for many, many years. A guy named Bill Bircher was there. I would watch these guys. I'd watch them do their craft and ask them questions about delivery and how great to sound on the air. And I take a little something from all of them and try to apply to what I was doing on the air. And I had so many talented people. WPST was a real hotbed for talent. A lot of people have gone on to really big things in programming up in New York and all kinds of things. So that was a real great place to learn from some very talented people, pretty much all of us early in our career. So yeah, I have to say I took a little something from everybody, whether it's how to be on the air, how to treat listeners, how to deal with contests. I've learned so much, and I'm still learning today.
That's awesome. That is so cool too, especially just to have that such a close bond to, with your brother and how he kind of just led you on that path. That's super interesting. So as one Beatle fanatic to another, I can't resist to not talk about, Get Back in that documentary that came out just a month ago. Just so like, what were your thoughts on it just as a whole? And then just like a few key things that just really stood out to you for it.
Well, I'll tell you what I really was excited about was I really, in my heart of hearts, believe that the true story has been told now. As Ringo had told me several times in our interviews over the years, he thought that was a very narrow look. The old Let It Be movie was a very narrow look at what happened and really spotlighted the drama and the negativity, which probably at the time the director thought made for an exciting film. But this Peter Jackson movie really gives you the whole story start to finish, how they're a little slow to start, try to get things going. Then the ideas start to come. Next thing you know, they're on the roof performing for a very small audience for the very last time. So it was just wonderful to see that, not only cinematically, how beautiful it was shot, restoring that old print and the work that Peter Jackson did, but just seeing the interaction from those guys, seeing all that footage that I had never seen before. As a pretty hardcore collector of Beatles stuff, I've seen my share of Get Back, Let It Be outtake footage, but a lot of that stuff I had never, ever seen before. I mean, when you ask about a highlight, I can't stop thinking about Paul sitting in Twickenham with his bass one morning, just doing this. And next thing you know, Get Back is born. You see Get Back being created before your eyes. And just talking about it now, I got freaking chills. I was out of my mind. My wife and my daughter are very, very patient. They know I love the Beatles. They think the Beatles are okay. So they understand I'm completely over the top. So they let me sit in our TV room with my box of Kleenex, crying every 30 minutes, watching this movie and listening to the music and seeing the interaction. I just thought it was just so wonderful. And then another part where Ringo's on the piano and he starts playing around with Octopus's Garden. And then George comes over and says, "Hey, can I help you? Let me see if I can help you with that." Seeing that personal moment was just so, so wonderful that was captured on film, because you only ever read about and heard about the camaraderie they had, the brotherhood they had. But seeing that amidst all the tension with the business pressures, personal pressures, it just boiled down to the fact they loved each other. Just like family, just like any family would fight and everything. And that warmed my heart to see that presented in that way. My only complaint, too short. 16-hour director's cut that Peter Jackson did make, but then halved for the Disney release. So until I get the 16-hour director's cut, I will not be fully satisfied with Get Back. 9.998 out of 10 stars.
Yes. I totally agree. Like, just to see that, just the bonds between the two, certainly in that scene with Octopus's Garden where they're constructing with Ringo and George, but also just like to hear them going off with some of those albums, or some of those songs that came off of their solo albums. All Things Must Pass they're working on, and hearing even Give Me Some Truth. And
Truth, I was gonna say, right?
It's just amazing to see that in construction, and you never really get to see that kind of glimpse like that, and certainly in that format too. So that was really cool. And to go off of that, I thought it'd be just interesting to hear your take. So what do you think? I mean, you can certainly name more than one. What do you think is the most underrated or underappreciated Beatles song? I know that's a big question, but you can certainly rattle off a few if you want.
It's a good question. I get asked all the time what my favorite Beatles song is, but I don't get asked very often what I find to be an underappreciated Beatles song. I would have to say What You're Doing. It's a very unappreciated song because it's an early song, of course, from Beatles for Sale, 1964, when they were still getting their songwriting together. But there's a depth to the songwriting and kind of clever changes in the chord structure, particularly where it breaks at the end of the verses or at the chorus. Just absolutely fantastic. I just thought that is a shining example of early Beatles brilliance, right before that rocket ship that was Rubber Soul Revolver Sgt. Pepper just completely took off. When they were still getting their craft together, they were worldwide superstars, and they were continuing to hone the art of songwriting. And that to me stands as one. And I think to a lesser extent, and not just because it's all Paul, Things We Said Today, another one, which I think is another example of early brilliance. We could see a glimmer of what might be coming somewhere down the line with those incredible songs. But I would have to say those are two underappreciated. And my third one, which might surprise you, is Revolution 9.
Oh, okay.
And I find that to be an underappreciated pastiche of audio verite, if you will. I think in 1968, hardly anybody outside of John Cage was doing anything like that. And if you listen to it as a complete work, as I have time and time again, it is striking, it is disturbing, it is beautiful. I hear angels in that song, and it typifies a revolution as thought of by John Lennon. And I just think the way it's done is phenomenal. I have an outtake of that. I have an acetate of it that wasn't released, where one of the things that they're mumbling in the background, John's going like, Tom Jones, there's a big singer from the 60s, like Tom Jones, where does that come from? I used to play that when I used to have my Beatles show. I played that on that. I just think that is a wonderful example of just how forward-thinking the Beatles always were. They could write a hit, they could do that effortlessly, but to go out in that direction is truly remarkable. And while a lot of people slag that song, don't like it, I find it stunningly beautiful.
That's awesome. That's so cool too. That's probably like the first take that I've heard of on Revolutionary 9 that was more positive than not.
Yeah, it's true, right? A lot of people write it off, just like they wrote off Within You Without You on Sgt. Pepper. You know, a lot of people flip the album over and start it when I'm 64. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
it's a great song.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So those lyrics, he was 24 when he wrote that song. I didn't know my head from my elbow when I was 24. And Harrison writing this deep song. I mean, my God, the talent in that band.
It's amazing. Yeah. Especially just like the variety and everything else too. Just to have that at such a young age is just unbelievable.
Yep.
But yeah, so as a Beatles fan, and just, you know, I saw Paul McCartney when I was 10 years old at Wells Fargo Center, and it was actually the anniversary of their performance at Shea Stadium. So that was super cool. And, you know, he played Let 'Em Down, you know, it was amazing. But
fantastic.
Yeah. So definitely want to get some Beatles questions in there for you. So you mentioned interviewing Ringo Starr, and I do remember listening to that during the pandemic not too long ago, and of course, you know, on the Beatles program that you had done. And so interviewing, you know, these stars who've become part of, you know, our lives, you know, what is that like, and how do you feel like interviewing them? Is every time just like a starstruck, you know, experience, or is, you know, just what is it like though? Yeah.
every interview with every rock star I've ever done has been thrilling to no end, because I'm such a music lover, and because these people that I've had the fortunate privilege of interviewing have meant such a huge part of my life, have been such a huge part of my life. I get nervous every time. And with Paul McCartney, who I interviewed for the first time on my second day on the job on MGK, I was paralytic. Were it not for the tape recorder that I made, I have virtually no recollection of sitting there with him. I'm not kidding. It's like I left my body. when he's sitting there right in front of you, and you're looking at him, and you're seeing those wrinkles, and you're seeing those eyes you used to see on Ed Sullivan, and all this stuff just comes flying back. You have to compose yourself and realize that, you know, you have a job to do, and you have to do somebody. And to Paul's credit, and this is amazing to me, out of everyone I've ever interviewed, he's the nicest one.
Wow.
The nicest one. Because he remembers what it was like to be a fan when he was standing in front of the stage door when Bill Haley was playing and hoping to get an autograph or a glimpse of him. And he's never forgotten about that. And at the same time, he also recognizes that you, in his presence, are paralyzed with fear. So because he's been doing so he almost goes out of his way to make you feel comfortable. The second time I got to interview him was in Atlantic City, and we thought it was going to be a phone interview. But it turned out that they at the last minute said, "Come on in and talk to him." And I'm like,
yeah.
Back through this, you know, labyrinth of security and area back there, and finally get into his dressing room before he does. He's finishing up his sound check, and he walks in with the guy I knew. Jeff Baker was his publicist for many, many years. Jeff sits him down on this, I'll never forget, this U-shaped couch. And then Jeff says to him, "Hey, you guys want anything to drink or anything?" Paul's like, yeah, get some waters for us, will you? Yeah, sure. So Jeff leaves. And there I am alone with Paul McCartney in his dressing room. And I just freeze, right?
Yeah.
What the hell am I supposed to say? Paul recognizes this, and he goes, "So what are you, still in Philadelphia, or what are you doing down here in Atlantic City?" And I'm going, Paul freaking McCartney's making small talk with me because I can't speak. This is insane, you know? And I'm able to step back and like realize the gravity of that later. But I mean, when you're going through it, I'm just trying to use my professionalism to try to not sound like an idiot when I'm interviewing him. but it's always nerve-wracking and it's always exciting and thrilling, whether it's on the phone or in person or on Zoom, no matter what it is. I just chatted with Joe Walsh last week, and we're going to do our interviews Monday when we're down at the Eagles concert, and that was really exciting. I had talked with Todd Rundgren a couple of weeks ago for the first time. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. So it's always exciting to interview these men and women who have meant so much to us and me my whole life.
That's awesome. And it's funny that you actually just mentioned that Joe Walsh interview, because I was going to bring that up too, in coinciding with this little question here. Since, obviously the Eagles are coming to town on Monday. So I just thought, be interesting to hear just your take on the album Hotel California, just the brilliance of it all. And perhaps a favorite song of yours on that album.
I will be glad to as soon as I go.
So Hotel California, obviously we've got the Eagles coming to town, and they're going to be doing Hotel California on Monday night in its entirety, along with some other stuff as well. And I just thought I'd get your take on Hotel California as an album, but also even perhaps your favorite song off it as well.
Wow, it's a tough one. Hotel California is an incredible piece of work, and I was turned on to it by my mother. My mother, rest her soul, was a huge Eagles fan. She loved them from the get-go. I remember her going out picking up Desperado and loving Doolin Dalton and all those great songs on there, Tequila Sunrise. But she was the one who went to the record store and was well aware that the album was coming out. I mean, I had my bedroom radio station upstairs. I thought I was pretty hip, but Mom knew when the album was out, and she brought it in and said, let's go down and listen to it right now. So we popped it on our console stereo and listened to the whole thing start to finish, just in awe at how wonderful not only the songs were, but the production and the recording was so pristine and the playing was incredible. Little did I know later, there's 44 edits in Hotel California. I didn't know that at the time, but it just sounded just fantastic. And the songwriting and the incorporation of a true hero of mine, Joe Walsh, into the band to give that a harder edge sound. His contribution, Pretty Maids All on the Road, just an absolutely fantastic song. Guitar work, the lick on Life in the Fast Lane, coming up with that. It just took the Eagles to another level. And I think it's a fantastic piece of work. Not my favorite Eagles album. Oh, it's a fantastic piece of work.
And what would that Eagles album be for your favorite?
The most, just like with the Beatles. My favorite Beatles album is their most fractious album they ever recorded, the White Album.
Okay, yep.
My favorite Eagles album is The Long Run, where they barely spoke during the sessions, right? I mean, they weren't even in the same room half the time. But I just think the songs on there are the best Eagles stuff I've ever heard in my entire life.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And going back, I guess, to the interview portion too. So is there anybody on your list that you're still looking to get for an interview, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's people I want to meet, because there are people I've met and haven't interviewed before, like Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. I met them up in New York. Unbelievably fantastic moment, and kind of a who's who of rock stars. I'd love to sit down with Pete Townsend, like John DeBella has done many times. He has a great rapport with Pete whenever he comes to town. So whenever Pete comes to town, John gets him. I don't have a prayer, and that's fine. But I would love to have a conversation with David Gilmour of Pink Floyd as well, who I admire just so much, both personally and professionally. I think he's a fantastic dude and a hell of a great guitar player. So he would be on my bucket list for sure. And though I think it's doubtful he doesn't do many interviews anymore.
That would be so cool. Yeah, David Gilmour and Pete Townsend would be amazing. Oh my God. So I thought I'd get your take. So about a month ago, or a little bit longer than that, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame came out with their recent list for the 2022 nominees. And a lot of the time there's been certainly controversies that have surrounded the recent nominees and whatnot. But who do you think are your biggest snubs for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? There's certainly a lot of them, but who do you think are the really, ones that are just unforgivably, left out of the Hall of Fame discussion?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because, a lot of people are complaining and moaning about who is nominated and who is inducted. And I always find that kind of negative. I think we should spotlight, to your point, more the ones who continually are snubbed year after year, despite their incredible contributions to rock music. For me, there are two that stand out right now that I am just shocked they're not in it, and that's Bad Company and the Guess Who.
Oh, yes.
It amazes me that the Guess Who are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The MC5, have been bandied about as nominated, and they're about kick out the jams. If anybody can name me another MC5 song, you're good.
Yeah.
Granted, it was a groundbreaking song and might be thought of as early in the punk movement, but the Guess Who hit after hit after hit, Bad Company, hit after hit, album after album. I just played Silver, Blue, and Gold yesterday. For that song alone, they should be in the Hall of Fame. And to go back even further, the precursor of Bad Company, Free, should also be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Paul Rogers and Andy Frazier. I mean, unbelievable musicians in that group, and put out some really, really great stuff. So Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the early days kind of had I don't want to go so far as say a bias, but they kind of turned their nose up on progressive bands and stuff like that. Like Yes took a long time to get in, and Genesis and all that. It's like, come on, just let people in, man. Let everybody in. It's rock and roll, man. It's inclusion. I think Dolly Parton, as gracious as it was that she recused herself from nomination, she belongs in there. Why not?
Yeah,
you ever listen to her album? She freaking rocks, man.
I was always so shocked to see some of those artists too that were never nominated. Like Bad Company has never been even nominated, let alone even considered. But like Boston and Warren Zevon and a lot of those.
Only the biggest debut album of all time for a while was Boston, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is just so shocking to me. I was stunned by that. But
yeah, and then in some circles they're referred to as like corporate rock, and I think there's an inherent bias against corporate rock bands.
Yeah,
it took fans to get Journey in,
right?
So I Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a great concept, but I think the execution has not been great. I have a friend who used to work for the Flyers who works for them now, and I know she's going to do wonderful things with that organization. So I have hope.
Yes. So interesting transition here, but obviously this past, I guess it was the summer technically, we lost Charlie Watts, of the Rolling Stones, and I just saw, obviously a couple weeks ago that they're releasing, their European tour dates for the 60th anniversary, and it's just amazing to see their longevity is still going strong. And likewise with Paul McCartney, as he just released also a set of tour dates for East Rutherford, and that's the closest one. Hopefully he gets around to Philadelphia.
Yeah, doesn't look likely.
But. Yeah. But what do you think about just some of these rockers and just how they're still going? Obviously Paul's pushing 80, he'll be 80 and coming in June. What are your thoughts on just their amazing longevity? And
I think it's such a privilege to be able to see someone like Paul McCartney or a band like the Rolling Stones or the Eagles live. And yes, the Eagles might not have all of their original members, the sad passing of Glenn Frey, of course, and Paul McCartney's voice may not be the way it was when he sung Helter Skelter back in the day, but the fact he comes out, makes the effort, sings these songs that we love and hold so dear to us. I mean, it must have been what it was like to see Mozart, conducting one of his symphonies in Vienna, in 1778 or something. Think about that. Seeing Mozart do his piece would be just absolutely astounding. But the fact that you and I have been in the same room as Paul McCartney when he's done his songs is just unbelievable. And a lot of people, get upset about bands with no original members and different members. The fact they want to get out and play is a blessing for us.
Yes,
we have to really appreciate that and have to go out and see these bands more, because they're not going to be around forever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that too, like, now that we're getting back into the concerts or whatever, and, we just had, Van Morrison, obviously, announced he's coming to town, and Jackson Browne in July, and just really, neat to see them still going strong and still having, the interest and passion to go and perform live. It's just amazing. And I guess going off of that too, I got one more question and then I'll, conclude, but, live performances are amazing. Of course, there's live albums out there. Is there a live album for you in particular that is just too good to pass up? It's just amazing. Is there a live album that comes to mind immediately?
Yeah, well, they're only for personal reasons, I'd have to say. As you probably know, most live albums aren't really live. There's a lot of post-production work done in the studio. Kiss Alive being a prime example. I think the only thing live on that was the audience.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, for personal reasons, Wings Over America by Wings, which came out in 1977, because that was the first time I got to see a Beatle, was during that 1976 tour at the Spectrum. And what was so exciting for me as a Paul fan is most live albums, you get the highlights. That was the first time I can ever remember the entire show being released on album. 3 albums of the Wings show, start to finish, all his Wings favorites, the Beatles acoustic set. It was just phenomenal. And it really brought a lot of stuff back for me seeing that show. So I guess that's probably my favorite. Although, truth be told, as you probably know, most live albums aren't really live. There's a lot of overdubbing done. But, it just brought it all back for me, and I just loved it to pieces.
That's awesome. Well, Andre, thank you so much for coming on here today. I've listened to MGK for about as long as I can remember, and you've been a huge part of, the soundtrack of my life, basically. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and talking with me.
Oh, Luke, it's my pleasure, man. Thank you so much, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Thank you.